Okay, looks like that's working. Yeah, so huge thanks for the invite, Tina. I'm really excited to present on this today. Campaign influence is one of my favorite topics in Salesforce. So always happy to share and talk about this with anyone who's willing to listen to me. So with that, a quick intro for myself. I've been working in Salesforce and account engagement more specifically, formerly known as Pardot, for about 5 years, 6 years. I started working in kind of full-time in 2018. I was at a Salesforce consultancy, and then I kind of transitioned into an internal marketing operations role for a few years. And now I'm back with another consultancy, Circante. Um, if you haven't heard of us, we kind of work as experts in the kind of the marketing automation and customer experience side of the Salesforce platform. So account engagement, marketing cloud engagement, and the new tools they've been releasing, data cloud and things like that, kind of our bread and butter. So I work on a lot of different client-facing projects, um, generally around kind of account engagement and Salesforce operations. So campaign influence is something that comes up pretty often there. And I'm based in Fort Worth, Texas, so quite a ways away from the Boston area, but really excited to be presenting to you all virtually. Um, oh, I see in the chat some people aren't able to see or hear anything. Is that?
Yeah, maybe we'll just do a quick
I-
check.
I can see in here, Tina.
Okay.
And Julian.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, yeah, I'll use the
All right.
chat to talk through with Dennis.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'll keep going for now, but let me know if I need to stop for a bit. Awesome. So agenda, kind of want to run through quickly kind of the purpose, the way I structured this conversation. Um, so why marketing attribution? I think it's like Tina was saying, it's kind of a hot topic. I think as a lot of companies are growing into the 2020s and different purposes and goals for a lot of organizations as they kind of restructure into maybe more revenue operations driven companies. And this can answer a lot of questions in that space. Just kind of want to go over some high level goals there. And then I really want to dive into like the data structure of campaign influence. I know there's a lot of materials from Salesforce that like getting started with campaign influence that guide you through turning it on and then maybe spinning up the B2B marketing analytics dashboard. And you see some cool drafts to look at, but sometimes it doesn't really may not understand what exactly all those data points mean and what exactly you're reporting on. So I really kind of want to break down how these systems work within Salesforce and make sure everyone understands the data comprehensively. So rolling back to the why, I think a lot of people have seen that the role of marketers has evolved in the past decade or so. I think a lot of there's these asks for marketers to drive demand generation and curate customer experience and engage through multiple channels. And a lot of that was previously, I think, implicit in how the role of the marketer. It's something that's always been there, but maybe the outcomes and understanding of success wasn't as explicitly defined. That overall growth of business or growth of channels as kind of a success metric, but not necessarily getting as granular on how specific ads or specific campaigns affected revenue. If you look at just kind of high level KPIs of number of email clicks, um, number of ad clicks, things like that. So with marketing attribution, you've got an opportunity here to explicitly define some of those items. And with a lot of organizations kind of restructuring into revenue operations, and different structural changes like that, where sales and marketing and service are all kind of more closely interlinked and kind of together as the stewards of driving revenue growth in the company, especially in the B2B space where you're looking at recurring recurring revenue and things like that. This is a powerful tool in that area. So you can look at like justifying your expenditure on different campaigns, scrutinizing and optimizing performance, really be able to articulate how the projects that you are working on are defining impact on growth for the company. And if you're looking to collaborate more or trying to collaborate more with other departments, and you can make a case on how these efforts are going to grow their success KPIs as well. This is a tool that can help you do that as well, and maybe help you make some friends at your company. So diving into the data structure then. So campaign influence, as it's defined within Salesforce and account engagement, is really a feature that lives fully within Salesforce. While it comes with your licensing for account engagement, some of the additional models, you'll want to, the actual calculations and everything that's involved in reporting are fully calculated within Salesforce and Salesforce objects. So just want to be clear what this data represents. And if you're not as familiar with working in Salesforce, maybe more familiar just working within the account engagement interface, kind of recap the data that is available. So the data objects within Salesforce to drive it, and hopefully there's some familiarity with some of these, but just to recap, campaign is a marketing initiative. So if you're using account engagement to set up emails and ads and stuff like that right now, you're likely pretty familiar with the campaign object. You need to hook every email, etc., that you're sending out to a campaign. Contacts are the individual record in Salesforce that's linked to an account. Now you might be generating leads out of account engagement generally if you're pushing new records into Salesforce. Campaign influence only works at the contact level. But if your sales team is working those leads and converting them into contacts and opportunities and accounts, the relevant campaign data that's associated with those leads will flow over into the contacts. Opportunity, so this is the record of a potential sale or deal in Salesforce. People working solely in marketing might not be as familiar with the data that's stored on there, and this can often be pretty highly customized per business. But this is kind of critical for campaign influence because the attribution is all assigned based on how the opportunities are, the data at the opportunity level. Then there's kind of these existing junction records, which is defined in Salesforce as a record, an object that looks up to two different records and creates a junction between them, as it says. Campaign members, that's the level of engagement between your contact and the campaign. And then an opportunity contact role is the specific point of contact for an opportunity. So like to be that like primary contact or signer or like accounting or something like that. These are two objects in Salesforce that define those relationships. These are data points that you may not have consistently in your org, depending on your setup. They're not as required, I think, as the default three objects we'll talk about here. So as we go through this and towards the end, I'll have some tips, like if these are points you're missing in your org, how you can start to collect that data. So finally, campaign influence itself is an additional object in Salesforce. Unlike a lot of other objects in Salesforce, it's not one that people are generally manually creating. It's all kind of auto-created in the back end. But it serves as a junction record between opportunity and campaign. So you see these link contact and campaign, and contact role links contact and opportunity. This kind of completes that triangle there as another junction record in between opportunity and campaign. And there's really three critical fields on this object that are going to be the main points you're looking at for most reporting. So one is model name. There's multiple campaign influence models, which we'll get to. but that's going to tell you which model created the record. Then you have influence. So that's the percentage of attribution determined by the model. So for every model, it's looking at the opportunity and the revenue associated with that opportunity or the pipeline value and distributing it across campaigns. So this is that core of the calculation that this model says this campaign has this much influence. And then there's a field called revenue share on there. So this is essentially a formula field. It's a default field, but it's essentially a formula that's this influence percentage times the default amount field of the opportunity it's connecting. So if you've ever looked in Salesforce at the schema builder, which is kind of a map of how data and objects are connected on the back end and how all the metadata is set up and where relationships lie, I took a quick little screenshot of like the organization for the campaign influence object here, just kind of visualization of what I was just saying. So the campaign influence is linking the campaign and the opportunity. You got that campaign member linking the campaign and contact role linking the contact and opportunity. So this serves then as a junction. So it becomes sort of a triangle between all of those 6 records. So how do you turn this on in your org? If you have a sandbox that you have access to as an administrator, you can feel free to follow along during this call. But it's a relatively straightforward process for an administrator. In Salesforce, if you look in setup and search for campaign influence, so that a few tabs, the one you want to start with is campaign influence settings. You'll see there's kind of a little breakdown. It says campaign influence and additional campaign influence models. You'll want to enable both of them. Campaign influence, this first part, anyone that has a full Salesforce licenses should have access to enable this. This enables the primary campaign source model that's kind of default with Salesforce. These additional campaign influence models, so these are part of your account engagement or Pardot licensing. So it's a Salesforce feature, but this won't be available unless you also have account engagement licensed and provisioned for your org. But this enables the multi-touch models that kind of give you different perspectives on your data. So you go ahead and turn both of those on to get started with this process. So flip that switch, then you'll go to one of the next tabs in setup. So campaign influence settings, and then there's one right next to it in the setup bar called model settings. And that should give you a screen that kind of looks like this. This is a list of the models that are available in Salesforce that you've enabled. They'll start as inactive, except for the primary campaign source model. So you have to come in here and activate these and set some settings. So just kind of define what those options are. When you click edit next to one of these checkboxes, that's give you this screen right here where the administrator can set the settings for the model. Active is going to turn on the model. So it's kind of the most straightforward one. The biggest implication I would mention for activating a model is that it does create records in Salesforce. So it does add some data to your org. So if you're in a case where you're really limited on storage in Salesforce, or you might have some specific limits on, or you're over your limit even, you might want to not activate all of these all at once, or really think through how you're going to activate these records. They're very small records, but depending on the number of opportunities you have and the number of campaigns you have, it's going to essentially be like a multiplication of those, creating a bunch of new junction records. So just something to be cognizant of in case that's an issue in your specific org. The default option basically controls which model shows up in the user interface. So if you've ever looked at a campaign record in Salesforce, I'm just going to switch to a dev org here, right click. You might have seen some of these default fields on your layout, like opportunities in campaign, value opportunities in campaign. And then there's, if you have the hierarchy information on here, those as well. That's kind of what the default model controls, and that whichever model you set as default, these fields here are essentially going to roll up the information from that model, so it's immediately visible. And if you look at related lists as well, if you set up campaign influence as a related list, this related list is going to just show the default model automatically. But you can still access all the models. They can all be active at once. So like example, like if you go actually into the related list, you can filter and pick a different model to look at, and then you can run reports that look at multiple models at the same time. If you're not sure which one to set as default and you're just kind of getting started with this, I would choose even. But if you have some other metrics or definitions around reporting you need to stick to, you might want to change this per your specific needs. So we'll go through how all those models are set up in a second. And then record preference, this last setting here is a little bit of a weird setting, little hard to understand, but overall, I would say set records with greater than 0% attribution. There's an option to create records that have only 0% attribution as well. So basically that creates a campaign influence record that says this campaign did not influence this opportunity for any other campaigns that might have been associated with that content. So you're going to end up making additional records and have to do some additional consideration for those when you're reporting. I don't think it's necessary for most businesses usually, but there are some like edge cases I've seen where you might want to report on that information, like say like this campaign touched so many opportunities but wasn't considered influential on some. If you're, again, getting started, I would do greater than 0% attribution, save on the data, makes reporting a little bit simpler. Finally, the last tab you're going to see in setup under campaign influence is auto association settings. So these are pre-calculation filters for the multi-touch models. We'll kind of come back to how these work, but these are essentially some options to filter some data out before the models even run, as opposed to filtering out at a report level.
Julian, just a quick question. With the auto association, do you have a recommended or best practice time frame for the association?
Yeah, I honestly, especially if you're starting sort of new with a new org, I like to actually just not put a time limit on it. I do think it's interesting sometimes to see that that's basically limiting where your source, like a first such information, where that time goes back. But sometimes I think it is interesting to see that like an opportunity that was made years later was sourced from a campaign, years ago even. So depending on like how flexible your setup is and you're just getting started with it, I would actually leave off the time frame unless you're seeing kind of like old data that's sort of irrelevant coming in. But some companies I know they have more kind of specific definitions where they want to see only their newer campaigns and how those tie to opportunities. So in that case, it's something that's a little more aligned to your sales cycle. So depending on your business, like half a year to a year, something like that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And finally, for end user access, so just kind of want to, in case you're relaying these instructions to your admin and you don't have direct access to do it, just to make sure that the marketing team or whoever else needs to see this data can see it. There's an app permission that's available in permission sets and profiles. It's just called campaign influence. So if you're using one of the CRM user or Sales Cloud user or Service Cloud user permission sets that can provide like licensing access for the account engagement Lightning app, that permission's already included in those. So likely if you're set up with the account engagement Lightning app already, you should be able to access all this data when it's turned on. But in case there's some custom permission set up or just specific deviations for your org, there's an app permission in the permission set that can be enabled. And then also related lists are generally the immediate way to see this on campaigns and opportunities. On campaigns, the related list is called influenced opportunities. And on opportunities, the related list is called campaign influence. And they then kind of show that summary of the default model influence records on a related list on those objects. Okay. So kind of break down what all the models actually mean and how you start to get to reporting on these. So there's a Salesforce default model. So that's that one that's not based on your account engagement licensing, can be enabled for anyone that has full Sales Cloud. It's really based on just one default lookup field on the opportunity, which is primary campaign source. This is auto-populated by Salesforce natively in some very specific situations, particularly when you convert a lead directly into an opportunity. It'll pick the most recent campaign member related to that lead and stick it on the field. It's also manually editable though, and I've seen people set up flows and things like that to fill in this field. So basically, whatever's in that field, the model that this one's going to create, that's going to assign 100% of the influence to the campaign in that field. So kind of unlike the multi-touch ones, you're not going to see more than one record unless you have that 0% attribution piece. So essentially, it's the last touch at point of lead conversion is what this represents by default. You can add some customization to how you fill in that field. And the models are based solely on that lookup field. I also want to take a second to talk about account engagement reporting, because there's also some reports you can find like within the account engagement interface or the classic Pardot interface around campaign performance that pull very similar data to campaign influence, but it's really a very different logic. So this is like when you look in some of the classic account engagement reports section and see this campaign performance campaign option here. This is based solely on the source campaign that's recorded for prospects. So that's often what's picked up from like the very first point of conversion by interacting with an account engagement asset, like your website or a landing page or things like that. So it's not looking at the campaign members in the same way. It's still based on opportunity contact roles in the case that you need to have an opportunity contact role for account engagement to be able to see the opportunity. But it basically derives everything that's at that opportunity to whatever's the source campaign for that prospect and kind of sums it up on a graph here. But doesn't have anything to actually do with the campaign influence object in Salesforce. So you may see different data when looking here versus on the campaign influence object. So then we get to the multi-touch models. So these are the ones that those enable additional models. Well, that turns on, activate the first, even, and last touch ones. And these auto-generate by intercepting campaign member, contact role, and opportunity information. So that kind of graph we went over near the front in Schema Builder. And they leverage the number of relationships that it finds when looking at those objects and the dates that the relevant objects were created and closed to distribute influence. So unlike the primary model, you're going to see potentially multiple records per model generated for each opportunity if you have all of them active. That should add up to 100% per model, but depending on how many contact roles you have associated with that opportunity and how many campaign members are in turn associated with those contacts, the number of records you have may differ and how far it breaks it out. So I'm going to take this kind of graph and like show how that would be distributed per model on the next slides.
Julian, for that model, just to clarify, it's based on active campaigns. So if a contact was an inactive campaigns, it wouldn't be part of the multi-touch attribution, correct?
You could filter out for only active campaigns at the auto association level if you wanted to, but otherwise it would be based on all campaign members, even for campaigns that might be inactive now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Dan, you have a question?
Yeah, great. Thank you. You saw I unmuted. The point where you say calculations update until opportunity close. So is that will campaign influence records be automatically created, or is it just the calculations on the record?
Yeah, so the records, you can end up with new records and changes in records pretty frequently if you have a longer like opportunity life cycle. So I think I get to this a little bit in a future slide, but like
Sure.
if you're looking at the like last touch and there's more campaign members, or even and there's more campaign members added, but up until that opportunity closes, you will see new campaign influence records be generated, as well as the influence percentages on the existing ones, that number adjusting appropriately.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yep. Awesome. Yeah, so first touch, this is kind of like more of your source information. So it's gonna, in this way, like in the model, when you're looking at opportunity, it's gonna look at the associated data, those contacts and those campaigns, and find like the earliest traded campaign member up until the point that you've limited on the auto association rules. So like we were talking about earlier, if you set a limit on for like a year on auto association rules, and there's campaign members that predate a year, it's gonna cut those off. But we'll say this one traded mid-January. There's a campaign from early January that's a record on it. It's going to associate 100% of the influence to that campaign. You're going to see one campaign influence record in this case, which is opportunity, contact, and 100% influence to campaign A. Yeah. Then last touch is sort of the inverse of that, right? So it distributes the influence to the most recent campaign member. And again, this is up until the point of opportunity close. So if this opportunity was created in mid-January and we see a newest campaign member added to one of the contact roles in February, and this opportunity is still open, it's gonna, that 100% of that influence is gonna be pushed here to campaign D. And Janesh, I saw your question in the chat, the difference between trading a campaign member record and campaign influence record. So campaign member records, you're gonna need to like define within your account engagement automation, like when you want to create campaign members and what status you want to create those as. So they'll all be traded automatically by like completion actions on a Pardot email or something like that. But they are like more user defined of when campaign members are being created, while the campaign influence records are automatically generating when opportunities are created and based on all this intersection between opportunity, contact roles, and campaigns. Hopefully that makes sense, but let me know if you need any clarification. And then you get even distribution here. So this distributes revenue amongst all related campaign members. So evenly splitting it by the number of data points that you have here. So in this like kind of example, we have 4 related campaigns, so it's going to give 25% to each, but this could be 6 campaigns or however many are associated per the limits of your auto association rules. It'll evenly divide that percentage across all of those. So if you're looking for a really kind of comprehensive view of how marketing is affecting all pipeline, this is kind of off my opinion, kind of the best starting point. So I think the process of one source campaign or one last touch campaign often doesn't really define what marketing is actually doing to drive revenue, even for people who are currently in the pipeline or current customers that it might be trying to upsell, things like that. So even distribution, I think, gives a bit better picture of like that whole life cycle of marketing influence on anything that's in your pipeline. So to get to some different scenarios, and I mean some questions that often come up when trying to understand how these models calculate. They only distribute influence where campaign relationships exist. And the value of those influence records will always add up to 100% per model. So like in this case, there's 2 contact roles, but only one of them has campaign members associated. These 2 are going to get 50%. It's not going to like have 50% missing because this contact role doesn't have any campaign members. And also, if there's no campaign members associated to the contacts and the opportunity at all, there's not going to be any campaign influence records generated there. And then kind of like what Dan was asking about earlier, the calculations take place until the opportunity is closed. So kind of looking back at that like even distribution scenario, but say this opportunity that was created was closed at the end of January before these February campaign members were added on, it's going to only distribute to the ones up until that point of close, right? So was there a question there, Dan?
Yeah, sorry. I hope you don't mind that I'm on mute and it's easier than typing.
No problem.
So if there's multiple opportunities, and like you said, that campaign B in this screenshot here was created or the campaign member was added on February 2nd, right? Would that, assuming the auto association rules were met for a different opportunity, that's where that influence would be applied? And then like kind of if there's 2 opportunities open as well at the same time, would they be applied on both opportunities?
Yes. Yeah. So it's per opportunity. So there's going to be a new set of influence records for every opportunity. And if the timeline of if one opportunity is closed and another one's still open, like this closed one, like the influence records for it are going to be those ones that are up until the close point, but that one that's still open would still consider all of this information.
And then, sorry, hopefully I'm not derailing you. One last question. This isn't retroactive either, right? If I turn this on today, like any closed opportunity from the past, how many ever years the org has existed won't create campaign influence records.
It actually is retroactive.
Oh, great.
That's a point out, like when you turn on the models and you adjust the auto association rules, it recalculates everything. So any past opportunities, and there's old enough campaign data to associate there, it will make all of those calculations and new records for you.
So if it's been turned on and then turned off and then turned back on, it would overwrite the previous records.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So anytime you adjust those model settings and the auto association settings, it essentially recalculates everything in the database.
Oh, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Julian, can I ask a question too?
Yeah.
I know that you're saying that a lot of these models are until the opportunity is closed. Is there ever a case, a scenario, or a model that is just calculating up until the opportunity is created? So wanting to see the opportunities that are influencing the creation of the opportunity versus seeing the full cycle.
Yeah, so the multi-touch models that like come with Pardot specifically don't they all function on this like up till close logic. Like we talked about earlier, that primary campaign source model is like that point of lead conversion. If you're taking like the native Salesforce approach to it, there also might be some options to like in your specific reporting filter filter like reflexively based on the date the opportunity was traded and the campaigns. So you like within the context of a report, you can see just that, even though the campaign influence is calculating for all of those. And you do have the opportunity to look into custom models too. Um, the custom model is kind of a big undertaking. So I would suggest taking the reporting approach first and see where you can get with that. Um, but that's yeah, essentially the models that are you can just turn on via your account engagement licensing all kind of operate up till close. Um, one other thing to call out, so the first and last touch, often they're just going to make one record with 100% influence. They do have a specific operation, like if both of your contacts are in the same campaign that it's finding first or last, it will divide between those contacts. So there are some cases in the first and last touch models where you'll see records with less than 100% influence. And it's going to be because there's multiple contact roles on that opportunity related to the same campaign that it's detecting as first. So it just divides that out by contact too. So but they should still add up to 100% in total for both the first and last models as well. Cool. So circling back to auto association rules a little bit. So often what comes up, you might have enabled this and then realize there's some data in here that you don't want to see or doesn't really make sense to think about in this context. So common things, like especially if you're using campaigns just as like target list that doesn't reflect that it actually engaged with anything, that's not necessarily something you want to attribute in your model. You have old unorganized data that you'd rather just get rid of. But like you said, like you turned it on, it's recalculating for old opportunities. You're seeing old irrelevant data like attributed. This is where auto association rules are helpful. So these are filters that apply before the model calculates. So like we talked about, you can add like a date filter to limit the attribution length. You can exclude certain campaign types. So if you have campaigns that are just being used as target lists and things like that, maybe cut those out of your rules. You can limit particular opportunity contact roles as well. So like maybe you don't want to consider people that are logged on there as just accounting or something as influential on an opportunity. You can cut those out with auto association rules. One of my favorite suggestions for this is a simple rule of responded equals true. So if you look at campaigns and Salesforce and you look at the campaign member statuses, you may set up, you have this responded checkbox as an option when you set up statuses. I like to use this as like just a simple binary of like this is worth this engaged more. This is worth in considering in influence reporting. So I like to use the chatbots just kind of as that, set up an auto association rule of responded equals true. And then when you look at the models, any of those campaign members where responded isn't true aren't going to be considered in the calculation. So like for kind of that example, even distribution piece we had earlier, it would go down to like 33% each instead of 25% each. There's a lot you can do with the auto association models. There's probably a few rules that make sense for your specific setup and the data you have, especially if you're coming into this on an older org where there's a lot of existing campaign and opportunity data. I would just say don't overcomplicate if you don't need to. Um, like we talked about with Dan earlier, like they will recalculate if you adjust your rules. So start simple, figure out what the data looks like, and add in as you need, and then recalculate. But you do run to the risk here that you're gonna like filter too much out, and like whatever you filter out at this level, like you cannot see in reporting at all because the records do not exist. So that's the main impact you're going to see with the auto association rules.
There's a question in chat, Julian. Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, how to see which type of campaign influenced more.
So
Yeah, so Dinesh, that will be where you kind of the actual running reports on this will be helpful. So I'm about to get to some example reports. But hopefully I'll answer your question in just a second. Awesome. And real quickly, so we can go into reporting in just a second. The Einstein Attribution model, if you have advanced or premium account engagement licenses, you might have access to this as well. This is a newer machine learning driven model Salesforce has rolled out. The logic of it is a little different. It's not based on the campaign member association information as much as it actually is the actual activity data you have in account engagement. So you turn it on in this interface and setup. It asks you to set a time frame and a success stage of opportunities as well to kind of fine tune the model for. And then you see a breakdown that looks more like this as opposed to based on campaign members. So it actually looks at like everybody at the account, not just the contacts you assign to the contact roles, and looks at all of the activity that they've engaged with in your Pardot database over time. So email types, website visits, form submissions, downloads, things like that, and distributes that revenue based on what it thinks is a more influential engagement. So this can be pretty cool data to look at. It's a very different logic than the additional models. You get it as it shows up as the data-driven model and report, so it functions the same way of trading campaign influence records. But you can see very interesting, I think, at least. It's a little harder to draw a straight line of like this was considered attributed X% because of this, as it does make these actual like numbers it comes up with here are all kind of driven by the machine learning model, which you don't have full visibility into. But I do find it interesting to run reports on this model and see what decisions it's making and see what information I can glean from that. And custom models, as I mentioned earlier, you can build additional models with Apex code. Relatively complex process. You got to trigger creating new records based on some of the existing models as well. So there's a blog one of our someone on our development team had previously written on this process that we'll link on the slide that Tina will send out if you want to look any more into that. But overall, I would say start with the default models if you're getting started. Figure out what you can report on there. It'll probably get you most of the way to what you need. All right. So to jump into reporting and hopefully get to Janesh's question, campaign influence reporting within Salesforce is really driven via one report type that can answer most of your questions on any of this data, and that's campaigns with influenced opportunities. So it's a default report type. If you have campaign influence enabled, you should have access to see this report type. And this will be your view to understand understand all the influence data in your org. So you see when I pull up a report like this, every line here is an instance of influence essentially. So it's one of those campaign influence records. It has the associated contact and opportunity and campaign And then the fields I mentioned at the beginning, that influence percentage and that revenue share field and the model name. And important they have a few considerations running these reports. I think there's a few pitfalls people make here. I think one of the most immediate ones is that record count in a report like this is a count of number of campaign influence records. It's not a count of opportunities. It's not a count of campaigns. So you might be double counting or even triple counting if you're trying to count things via record count with a report like this. So a couple things I usually add on like automatically to these reports is pull up the opportunity ID and the campaign ID. And via Salesforce reporting, you can drop down here and add a unique count. And unique count campaign ID. So when you look to draft and have metrics, those unique counts will give you actually number of opportunities, number of campaigns, as opposed to number of instances of influence, which usually isn't what you might be looking for. And when reporting on actual revenue and amount data, I think another pitfall here is people start to sum the amount field, which that's what the revenue share field is here for. So that is going, if you do any summaries on a report like this by the amount field, it's going to potentially duplicate the amount of that opportunity as well, the number of records it has. So the revenue share is doing that calculation and that breakdown for you. So you'll want to, really this is the field you want to sum for any revenue data, because it's going to make sure when there's multiple influence records, it's multiplied appropriately. So you're not adding the same dollars together. You also see that this model has that it has records for every model. So and every model is adding up to 100%. So with that, you can either compare models or you can filter down to one model for your specific report. You generally don't want to like add the models together because again, you're going to run into double counting revenue or double counting counts. So again, depending on what you're looking for, say we're trying to just report on even for now, first thing I would do would be to put in a filter on the model name and filter it down to just the even distribution, for example. And so like getting back to like Ganesh's question in terms of like how to see which type of campaign influence more revenue. Once you've filtered to the model you want, this is where you really have a lot of opportunities with this report type to divide the data in a lot of different ways. So if you actually see this report type gives you access to every field on the campaign member and contact role and opportunity and contact and account. So it's a fairly wide-reaching report type, as opposed to a lot of report types in Salesforce, which are 1 or 2 or 3 objects. So, but because there's so many different relationships that tie back to this campaign influence record, so that really gives you the opportunity to answer quite a few different marketing-driven questions via this one report type. So for the example of like what campaign type performed better, right? One thing we can do is group this by type, which campaign type should be an available field here. And that'll give us a comparison of campaign types. I'm going to add a chart here. Trying to see what. So we'll look at the column, campaign type, and then we'll look at, do the campaign name. Example. Group this by the campaign name. I'll go ahead and run this report. So for example, this is going to give you 2 columns based on campaign type with the breakdown of the campaigns of each type that are driving X amount of revenue share. So that should basically, this would give you a summary of different types of campaigns and how those campaigns are driving influence. There's also, so like for Dinesh, I think for this question, this would help with what you were looking for. But there's also a lot of other ways you could organize a report like this. So in case you didn't want it broken out by campaign, but broken out by opportunity name, you could do it that way as well. And then you see a summary of opportunities. Oh, just the report. There you go. So groups of types of campaigns and then the opportunities that it's influencing for each type, things like that. So really, I think any sort of impact, you want to understand how marketing is impacting any sort of specific type of region, like you can look at pulling any of the account info, like compare industries, we could do something like that as well if we wanted to get cross-reference that information in a chart like below. Really a lot of different info that can all be intersected here. You might also want to look at multiple influence models at the same time. So like in that case, you can pull comparative reports too. So that in that way, just make sure to do the influence model as one of your groupings as opposed to filtering by it. But then you can see like a little bit of a breakdown of what campaigns are pushing more on the first touch versus last touch side and how that looks like as a full breakdown, things like that.
So this is really amazing, Julian. I love how you're just going hands in here and showing us all the different ways that we can slice and dice these reports. Because at the end of the day, right, it's like, what do you as the marketer or your leadership team want to see? And just the fact that you've done all of this work, all the foundation, you've done the settings, you understand what the data means, you can really like dice this in so many different ways, which is really cool. And I agree with Dan. I also love watching other people pull reports because you like learn something new all the time and like cool little tricks. So this was really amazing. I do want to just be really mindful of the time because we're getting to the top of the hour and see if there's any other questions or anything else that you want to add in, Julian. Like otherwise, this was so incredible. So many learnings.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Tina. Yeah, if anyone has any questions I can answer real quick, happy to do so. Otherwise, I know Tina will share this deck with you all. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or via my email. Happy to give some quick insight or like that.
I mean, I know you only have a minute, and this is definitely not a minute question, so maybe I'll peel off offline. But yeah, I was just curious about, you touched on it earlier, but I think a key piece here is contact role association, and obviously that's a key driver in campaign influence. And I know there's different ways to automate that, but I think that's be curious to hear your feedback on that. Yeah, and don't feel like you have to answer it now, but I can peel off.
Yeah, I have a couple notes on that on the slide. Tina will send out. I know it's a little difficult, like you're saying, because it's not required by Salesforce there's no native way in Salesforce to require that you have contact roles and opportunities. So that leads to a little bit of a gap often when they're logged. There are some fairly straightforward automations I think you could put together with your Salesforce team to require that sort of info. Simplest way I would say is make a contact field, a custom contact field on the opportunity, require that field on the opportunity, and then you could do a little flow in the background that makes the contact roles for whatever's put in that field. And that there's ways to make that more complex too, given the amount of data you have, and maybe you want to do multiple contacts, but that would be it's a relatively easy starting point if you're struggling with that, I find.
Right. Yeah, I think that's more kind of governance and process changing.
Yeah.
Those pesky contact roles can't get anything without them.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thank you again for answering my questions. Great session.
Yeah, appreciate it. Again, yeah, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or my email. I really appreciate the invite again, Tina. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone. Great weekend.